Hello, you're very welcome to RTE's Your Politics podcast. We're here in the bowels of Leinster House. I don't know why we've just been laughing. There's not particularly anything to laugh about at the moment. But with me, Paul Cunningham, Sandra Hurley and Micheál Lehane to share their wit and wisdom on the political week just gone. And the big surprise of the week, I suppose, Micheál, the Social Democrats. All change.
All changed suddenly, yeah. And I suppose the party had been talking about getting things in order ahead of the next election. Even at their party conference, they were talking about red lines around negotiations. But I think there still was an expectation that particularly that Roisin Shortall would be there at the helm of the party for that. Always that view that the next election would be key for the party and perhaps it would be Roisin Shortall's shot at becoming a cabinet minister. Perhaps that's still a possibility, but there will be a new leader in place now. As political departures go, it was a surprise, but it was good-humoured and it seemed fairly relaxed. Surprisingly so, that was the tone of the room. There doesn't appear to be, so far as we can tell right now, a backstory behind what led to the departure. They both insist it was just a matter of timing and giving a new person time to be ready for the local elections first next year.
I met both of them later on in the evening and they were still in that relaxed mode, as if they were happy that they'd been able to tell their story the way they wanted to do it, that it had not been sort of something that leaked out, and there was very much a case of job done. That was the sense of it. And they
like
were
boxers, politicians don't usually get to leave on their own terms, but it looks like they have.
That was the way it looked, yeah.
But always in politics, the question, what next? Holly Cairns seems to be the name that's knocking around the most. We had Jennifer Whitmore on Morning Ireland this morning. She's thinking about it. Your assessment, Sharon?
Ciann O'Callaghan is said he is thinking about it as well. Gary Gannon has ruled himself out. Jennifer Whitmore says she's thinking about it. I think for some listeners, perhaps her interview on Morning Ireland this morning, she didn't sound completely 100% gung-ho about taking on the job. That's just reading into it. We don't know for definite. We'll have to see over the next couple of days. From talking to people, there's no question that Holly Cairns is the favourite. She seems to have a sort of an X factor. She's young. She's very articulate on television. When it comes down to it, people in the party will be thinking about the face on the poster, the ability to galvanise people, to gain membership for the party and to get those extra seats in the next couple of elections that are coming up. And she may well be that person. It would be a very big step up for her. The question is whether, at this stage, whether we will have a contest, I suppose. Will somebody else run against her? There's kind of pros and cons there. It's good for the party in one way to have a contest. They would, I understand, have hustings. They would go around the country to local members. That would test the candidates. They'd be able to hear what they're, hear and see what they're made of. And it would also garner publicity for the party. That's good as well for a small party that struggles really sometimes to... in the shadow of Sinn Féin, in the opposition, they would be looking for a bit more attention, I suppose. But the other side of it is that it's clean to have one candidate going forward, one person becoming leader, and it gets the process done.
I thought it was funny. I was talking to one Labour person, Sandra, and they were saying that I wish they'd just get it over with. And there was a sense that everyone else has to set back while the Social Democrats consider the issue of who they want. So it is one of those things, a magnet for publicity, an opportunity to be able to portray yourself to the nation as the next thing, the new generation, something different. And I think they could enjoy themselves.
The only thing is, when you look at the polls where all the parties are kind of basically bobbing along within margin of error, local elections next year, Europeans, maybe general, we don't know. So there's an awful lot of competition out there. And when you look at two small, and I know, people, Jennifer Whitmore was saying this morning, it's only people in the media who talk about Labour and the Social Democrats and so on. But equally, Labour would certainly, people in Labour certainly
Labour
talk about it. Yes, they do.
And
I mean, it just seems daft that two such similar parties would be running candidates against each other in, say, the local elections.
Because people want choice, isn't that right, Micheál?
more choice. That
More
was
choice,
the
not
message
less
yesterday
choice.
from Catherine Murphy, that's why they established the party. I suppose you did see an effort before, didn't you, with Brendan Howland going into the last local elections where he spoke about Greens and Social Democrats being in the order of preference for Labour voters, and he gave that nod in that direction. I don't know how much that yielded, and it probably didn't yield very much for the Labour Party, but certainly that does look to be the natural block. But resistance, I think in the past, when the Social Democrats were formed, there were some informal manoeuvres by Labour, even around sharing some time on key debates, but that was rebuffed in no uncertain terms. I think there is an intriguing possibility, and it's a real far out theory in relation
go
to
for it.
Let's go for it. Let's go for it. In relation to the Boundary Commission, which could report around July, the Boundary Electoral Commission, that Holly Cairns and Cork South West is in a part of Cork South West, that if Kerry were to be divided back into two, that Kerry South could take that portion of West Cork.
Cork is not ceding any
Apparently this
territory.
happened at some point in the late 60s. Now, culturally, that would be very difficult for the people of West Cork, but it would present Holly Cairns with a huge challenge indeed to hold her seat.
Do you know what we'll do if that happens? We'll go down and we'll do a podcast just from the border. We'll do it just from there.
The border that no longer exists because it moves 20 miles of the road.
Yeah,
I remember Seamus Healy saying once that Tipperary could never become a single constituency because North and South were culturally different. Well, definitely West Cork and South Kerry would be culturally different, I think.
They say the same thing about Donegal. You know, it used to be North East and Donegal South West, and there was sort of a divide. And, you know, you'd even hear them saying, you know, the wrong end of the county, you know. So it was quite sort of territorial. But what, you know, it's nearly one constituency, a little part of Donegal still locked into Sligo.
Okay, stop with your geographical wanderings there for a moment and come back to what was supposed to be the big story of the week, the 1.3 billion cost of living package. Is it enough to bolster the government through, you know, all the pressures people will be under in the months ahead?
I suppose two things. The government do think inflation has peaked. I mean, whether it has or not, but I suppose the calculation is based on that. And they think, and there's some fairly tough talk from the Taoiseach on that energy prices can fall a little bit quicker than the energy companies are suggesting at the moment.
Or he'll act.
Yeah, he will act, and he will ensure they do. So if that were to happen, I suppose it would be enough. If it doesn't, well, then they could be bother again. And particularly then if you have the evictions ban expiring, and if there's a lot of people, I think there is an awareness in government too that while the beast from the east didn't come, there hasn't been that really period of cold weather yet. But if that could still strike at some point in March, and that could change things.
Yeah, and the sticking point now, Sandra, it's the hot potato, isn't it? It's the evictions ban. And there seems to have been something of a shift within Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael on this. Talk to us about what's happening there.
Well, we're expecting a decision in the next couple of weeks with the ban due to begin to expire at the end of March. So it's certainly a key battleground, all of the opposition saying it should be extended. And of course, homelessness charities as well, really pushing for it to be extended further. But we've seen some very tough talk from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael over the last couple of days, particularly at leaders' questions this morning. The Taoiseach Micheál Martin warning of unintended consequences, suggesting that it could mean more small landlords leaving the market, that things could get worse if it was extended.
Some interesting numbers there, didn't he, about the number of landlords that sold out last year as opposed to the number.
13,500 was what he was saying, and he described them as leaving in droves. That was and the government needed to be aware of that, cognizant of it when it was deriving its policy, because he felt when it came to the extension of any ban, it couldn't be short term, would have to be longer term. So once again, he just seemed to be putting weight on the problems with this. And I think that was the biggest hint we got so far. That maybe
if it was extended at the end of the year, which the opposition are calling for, well, they say, well, that would present a massive difficulty in January, and they think more landlords would exit. So you can see the political thinking here, although they say they're still looking at it from a policy point of view and a legal point of view. What Micheál Martin was clearly doing today was because it was an unguarded kind of answer from him. He said he was sharing things with the Oireachtas. He was setting the ground for that evictions ban not to be extended.
And the cards they haven't played is that the Minister for Housing is still talking to the Attorney General in relation to the constitutional legality of extending the ban.
Yes.
And also the
deep pondering from Darragh O'Brien on constitutional questions.
And we leave that there. And also the Taoiseach talking about, Sandra, the tax, you know, because there's a lot of discussion now about more favourable tax treatment for these small landlords, you know, because they say they're unfairly treated compared with the big folks.
Yeah, this has been bounced around a lot over the past year. They didn't do anything in the budget. It is something that is seen as perhaps politically difficult. I think Fianna Fáil a bit more hostile towards it. The Taoiseach Leo Varadkar was again today suggesting something around the tax treatment for landlords needed to be looked at. But then he said we should really wait until the budget to do that. So I'm not convinced there's something coming there for landlords. I think the danger, however, for the government is the homelessness figures shooting up pretty fast, because they have gone up over the last couple of months. But people who work in the area will tell you that the number of evictions has really slowed down. Obviously, most evictions are not happening. There's a few, obviously, but the numbers would be expected to go up, and that's really, really damaging for the government. We're going to get, I expect, more homelessness figures tomorrow, so let's see what has happened over the past month.
And that's what the Social Democrats, Micheál, that's what the Social Democrats co-leader current, Catherine Murphy, was warning, was that if homelessness figures are going up when the ban is still in place, if you lift the ban without having a really good plan in place, it's going to become a torrent.
I think for the first time there probably is an awareness in the Department of Finance, more so perhaps than last year, about the whole landlord issue, and perhaps a move in that direction. And I suppose the template for this has been set down, and Dennis Naughton has mentioned this several times, around the renting out of land, which is in place for over a decade now, that long-term leasing of land gets very favourable tax treatment. It would seem straightforward enough if that particular model was used again, that long-term leasing of property could qualify for something similar.
Except all of those measures would take a couple of months at least to come into effect, even if you were pressing ahead with them very far. As you say, Sandra, the homelessness numbers have continued to rise during the time of the eviction ban. And we know from the latest draft report, I mean, the problem is, where do people go? There's simply nowhere for them to go that they can rent, that they can afford.
The problem is really acute, and the opposition would keep pointing to the fact that they do not see that there has been any new initiatives from the government since this ban came into place at the end of October. The government says it's continuing to work on its Housing for All plan, but nothing particularly extra appears to have been done during these months that were supposed to be the breathing space.
And I would say, for example, when Peter McVerry was talking in Buswell's, the hotel very close to Leinster House, he said the government has got a plan for modular homes around 600 or 700. We need 6,000 or 7,000. I know he was putting it on that level of scale, as otherwise the crisis is really going to tip over the cliff.
So I think we can expect to be hearing a lot more about that one over the next couple of weeks. One thing we're already hearing a lot about, it was raised today in the Dáil, and there's an exhibition on here in the coffee house over in the Leinster House extension about the war in Ukraine tomorrow, of course, being the 1 year anniversary of the war starting, and the Dáil marking it with a minute's silence, Micheál.
Yes, and some very strong words from the Ceann Comhairle followed, and making an appeal to parliamentarians in the Duma to express opposition to the war in Ukraine, a direct appeal parliamentarian to parliamentarian, which was striking, and some strong words too from the Taoiseach about what was happening, and a fairly terse enough exchange with Richard Boyd Barrett afterwards around that question of, is Ireland's neutrality being compromised when it comes to providing people from the Defence Forces to get involved in training Ukrainian forces in the whole area of demining. So that was contentious enough. And also in LH, there is that exhibition that you spoke about, which shows in first hand and the scale of the horror from this time last year.
In fact, Tony Connolly, our Europe editor, was tweeting a Eurobarometer survey as well today that showed, I think we're one of the highest levels of support for Ukraine and Ukrainian people, and support for Ukraine
in the European context, and welcoming the numbers as well. And Tony's obviously, he was there when the war started. He's back there for another year, sort of 1 year on, and has been giving some analysis about where the country is and where the war is. A year ago, I was on the borders of Poland and Ukraine, watching those hundreds of thousands coming across the border, the women with their children, because the men folk of fighting age were being left behind, and they were crossing over with a couple of plastic bags, not knowing where they were going and not knowing what was happening to all of their loved ones behind them. It really was absolutely gut-wrenching and horrific to see that. And 1 year on, we still don't see a game out of this war. One of the interesting dimensions to it will be the influence of the Chinese, who are not saying very much, but beginning to formulate some form of plan. And that'll be just interesting to see what way that works out. But 1 year on, it's still just so grim.
And it's bizarre because there's a Russian offensive going on at the moment in the east, but the kind of fighting, the images you see out of what's going on there, it's like World War. Exactly. People, these muddy trenches, appalling conditions, human waves being massacred.
And that image, did you see pretty much coming out of, the Wagner Group, where they are taking people who have been convicted of crimes, putting them in military uniforms, sending them up to the Ukrainian front on the basis that you get out of prison if you go to war, and then sending them over the top, sometimes without even weapons, and they're just being mowed down, as you say, like daisy cutters, like World War One. And some of the images over the past week of where you're seeing the death toll in a small area in just one day.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
And of course, Ukrainian civilians like those in Bucha, they're braced now for, possibly more missile strikes tomorrow as Russia marks the anniversary its way. One other issue that actually didn't happen this week more than anything, no protocol deal, Sandra. It was supposed to happen
we
on
were all
Tuesday.
excited.
Rishi Sunak was going to his cabinet.
We are ever optimistic, and it looked like all the choreography was there really just to help Rishi Sunak over the line. The deal we were told was done, but all the optics and him travelling to Europe and travelling to Belfast, it all seemed to be there just to help him to sell it at that final hurdle. But we've seen a hardening of language from the DUP over the last couple of days. It certainly isn't going to happen in the next little while. So I think we've fallen back a few steps, unfortunately. So we can only hope that they manage to get it together over the next week or two. But it has slipped back a fair bit this week.
Did he bottle it?
Well, I think it was interesting to see the difficulties that he faces. Yes, he's the new leader, but he's got problems on the left and right. And it was the intervention of Boris Johnson who decided out of the blue to write an opinion piece saying, don't get rid of that protocol bill, which is going through the Houses of Parliament, which effectively allows the UK government to rewrite anything it wants. And that is incendiary. That is the trade war. If that goes through, that's what's going to happen. So when we thought we were heading towards a deal, then Boris put his oar in and suddenly things began to shudder again.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. But again, I suppose a reminder, we got an awful reminder, didn't we, from Oma last night of what's at stake here. And, so much talk about trying to get power sharing back together in the run-up to the Good Friday Agreement. Last night, a reminder, that awful shooting of somebody, who's out doing football training with a team. A reminder of, what was and what can't be. But nobody wants to go back to, well, apparently one or two people do.
Absolutely, and I suppose the condemnation, as expected here, very strong today. Sinn Féin's David Cunningham speaking in the Dáil in Leaders' Questions, saying that those responsible need to be put behind bars as quickly as possible. I suppose that illustrative of the feeling and the sentiment around here. And again, it shows this against the backdrop of that stalled political impasse in the north. But I think too, despite everything, an expectation perhaps that the protocol deal perhaps is close enough now, despite the waves of protests from some unionists around it, that it could happen. The Taoiseach in the last few hours saying that he remains hopeful. So I suppose he has taken a fairly guarded approach in his language around this. So that would suggest perhaps that it is near at hand.
Which is interesting in how he's speaking on the issues of the protocol, whereas before maybe he would have been a bit more forthright.
Yeah, I think that is fairly consistent with his return as Taoiseach. Leo Varadkar is playing it far safer in his language on many topics and is presenting both sides of the argument now a lot more than he used to.
All right. Let's leave international diplomacy and matters like that and trade to one side and talk about partisan politics. Fine Gael and Sinn Féin on expenses.
Yeah.
Yeah, the grudge match continuing there. The Irish Times publishing a story last weekend that seemed to illustrate some discrepancies between Sinn Féin's electoral declarations and their audited accounts, particularly for 2016. Sinn Féin says nothing to see here. These are minor, maybe they're errors. But Fine Gael clearly has taken this up. There's certainly we understand that originally was put together. A document was put together by a Fine Gael activist and passed on to SIPO, which is now examining all of this. But it's not at the stage of an official investigation. But Fine Gael has certainly seen it as ammunition to fling at Sinn Féin and has been relentlessly doing that over the past week. And it looks also like partly revenge for the Paschal Donoghue expenses war over January.
They were very hurt. They were very
hurt.
And Paschal remains hurt, judging by his press conference yesterday morning on the streets around Leinster House with other ministers, saying that Sinn Féin have to be held accountable to the Dáil in the same way that he was. Equally, Fine Gael, of course, were saying throughout that SIPO had to be given time and space, but they believe now Dáil accountability for the lead opposition party is more important.
What else came up at that news conference yesterday?
Well, yes, quite a surprise really that the government chief whip admitted trying cannabis in her 20s, Hildegard Naughton, but it wasn't for her. And Neil Richmond, another junior minister,
as in wasn't for her, as in something that she didn't want to do.
She didn't like it.
Yeah, wasn't for her. Yeah.
As in it wasn't for me.
That was exactly. Neil Richmond too was asked the question. This, of course, all in the context of two things. One, Desi Ellis making comments that cocaine was everywhere, and he believes it is in Dáil Éireann as well, and also the setting up of the Citizens' Assembly on drugs. The junior minister Neil Richmond saying he had tried cannabis in the Netherlands. That was the difference there, and it was a horrible experience. Paschal Donoghue never dabbled in anything like that. And Simon Harris had been at that press conference but had to go away to take a Dáil question at the time. But he did stick to his line, which is interesting as well about recreation
because he
drugs.
was going on, he was raising this in the Dáil. Yeah.
He was, that he believes it's far too prevalent, recreation drugs, and he's making a link between that and gangland crime, and people have to be mindful of that. So it's kind of two messages coming.
I think it has to reach a point where we have to sort of nearly get over this. Labour TD Áine Lawlor was making statements on the plinth last week that people in the media had taken drugs, politicians had taken the drugs, and we just need to get on with this. And when it comes to the Citizens' Assembly, we nearly have to stop at step one and nearly accept we know that there's an awful lot of drugs washing through the country. We have to talk about criminalisation of those who take it, which particularly affects those in deprived areas. And we have to talk about all the other amounts. So let's get the old Citizens' Assembly up and running. And the next piece in that jigsaw, we had the terms of reference which went through the Iraq this week. The next thing is who is the chairperson going to be. And I think that's going to be key with regard to how the business of the Assembly is handled.
I think as an issue, though, I don't see the path for this one. I think the Citizens' Assembly in the past has been able to chart a course, even if it has been a difficult course. If you have Simon Harris, who clearly is a man with leadership ambitions in Fine Gael, really sending a signal out to those within that party who would be seen to the right of it around law and order and the importance of it. He clearly is doing that. It does seem, if the recommendations come back from the Citizens' Assembly, can you even have cohesion guaranteed within government?
Sorry, Sandra, go on.
Well, I think you're unlikely to see a decision before the next election. I mean, it's contentious. So whatever the Citizens' Assembly comes up with, and in the past it has surprised people on abortion. People at the Citizens' Assembly went much further than people expected.
None of us,
exactly.
Nobody could have predicted. And even the most pro-choice TD at the time here in Leinster could not have predicted that the change that followed after the setting up of that Citizens' Assembly on repealing the 8th would happen within this body politic in that space of time. So we could all be surprised.
I suppose its real key is that if you set it up quickly, and we've been told that it'll be set up by April, which means it reports back by the end of the year, which means it goes to committee in 2024. And if it is, eye-catching in relation to what they want to do, then trying to get that through the Oireachtas in the last 6 to 8 months is going to be
don't hold your
happen.
breath.
Yeah,
don't hold your
I
breath.
don't think so, not before an election.
Write that down now.
Yeah,
Hurley says
play it back.
not going to happen.
And that Fine Gael press, that was supposed to be about the cost of living, was it, Sandra?
Yes, I think, a little ruse that Fine Gael have done. They did it previously after the budget, went on a canvas of commuters around Dawson Street. They did the same thing.
Cunningham said to an unsuspecting public.
Yes, just going about their daily business when they're accosted by some cameras and some politicians. And they tried the same thing yesterday, but it was definitely overshadowed. The main newsline out of it was around Hildegard Naughton. But it's quite funny if you watch the footage when Hildegard Naughton is saying that she did try cannabis once in her 20s. Paschal Donoghue seems very disapproving and is sort of almost kind of tut-tutting in the footage. So
he's shaking his head,
yes.
He's grimacing, his lips are pursed, his eyes are downcast.
Not happy.
All the body language is going.
Oh, you can see the memes coming right now, can't you? All right, well, that's it from us for this Thursday. We'll be back with you again at the same time next week. And if you enjoyed listening to Your Politics, please subscribe and leave a review. Until then, from Sandra, Micheál, Paul and me, Áine Lawlor, goodbye. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.